By the time I dropped the stick, the Alpha King's wolf had destroyed 41 gifts, and I knew the exact number because counting ruined things was precisely the sort of work they handed a girl like me. I was the one who swept up after. Every morning that long autumn, the great hall of Holloway filled with offerings for the king. Roses bundled by the armload, bolts of river silk, gold chains heavy enough to anchor a boat. And every morning his wolf walked the length of the hall and tore them to pieces. And every morning somebody had to kneel in the wreckage with a broom and a basket. And that somebody was me. Tilda. Scullery Omega, 22 years old, a woman grown, and nobody's notion of a prize, with flour permanently under my nails and a gift for being exactly where the mess was. I want to be clear that I did not have to be there. An Omega can keep her head down in the kitchens and never once climb the steps to the hall. But the wreckage was interesting, and I have always had the bad habit of being interested in things that are none of my business. And so I volunteered for the sweeping when no one else would. And that is how I came to be the only person in Holloway who had been watching the wolf properly. Because everyone else watched it wrong. They saw a king's beast destroying every gift his advisers brought, and they all agreed on the explanation. The wolf was rejecting the women. Too proud, too particular, no lady fine enough. The whole court had decided the Alpha King's wolf was a snob. I knelt in the ruins every morning, and I saw something different. The wolf had torn the roses to ribbons, but the lady who brought them had walked past close enough to touch, and the wolf had not so much as turned its head. It had crushed a gold chain to scrap, and let the noblewoman who clasped it retreat without a glance. 41 gifts in pieces, and not one woman frightened, not one snarl at a living soul. It was not the women the wolf hated, it was the things. Nobody asked the scullery girl her opinion, so I kept it, the way I keep most things, to myself, and a little smug about it. The Alpha King I knew only the way the whole pack knew him, from a distance and with care. Roderick of Holloway ran his kingdom like a man who had never once lost an argument, because he had never once lost an argument, and he wore his authority so easily it was almost rude. He was not a cruel king, he was a controlled one. The court adored that about him, the iron calm, the mind that ruled the beast. And so, the wolf's little reign of destruction was not just inconvenient, it was an embarrassment. It made the most controlled king in living memory look like a man who could not govern his own animal. And I had seen, sweeping near the dais, exactly how much that cost him. His jaw did a particular thing when the wolf disgraced him. I had become a small private scholar of that jaw. I should have left it there. A wiser Omega would have. It happened on the morning of the 42nd gift, which was the worst yet. A marriage cup, silver chased with gold, brought by Lady Hesper herself, with the whole court assembled to witness the king formally consider a match. I was not meant to be in the hall. I had been sent up with a sack of kindling for the great hearths, and I came in the servants' door at precisely the wrong moment, into a silence so formal it had a temperature, with 300 wolves watching Lady Hesper present a cup to a king on a throne. I have replayed what happened next a great many times. I would love to tell you I did something brave. What I did was trip. The flagstone by the hearth was uneven. My arms were full of kindling. and I went down hard in front of the entire court of Holloway, and the kindling went everywhere. A clatter of dropped sticks skidding across the polished floor of the great hall, into the formal silence under the noses of the lords. One stick, a plain length of split birch no longer than my forearm, slid all the way to the foot of the dais and stopped against the king's boot. I wanted to die. I want that on the record. And then the wolf came down off the dais. It came the way it always came for the gifts, that long, unhurried walk, and the whole hall braced for it to destroy something. And Lady Hesper drew the marriage cup back toward herself, and the wolf walked straight past the silver cup, past the roses banked along the dais, past every fine and costly thing in the room, and it went to the plain split stick lying against the king's boot. It lowered its enormous head. It nosed the stick. And then the Alpha King's wolf, who had not been calm in 6 weeks, who had reduced 41 treasures to splinters and scrap, lay down on the cold flagstones with the birch stick between its paws, and let out the longest, most contented sigh I have ever heard an animal make. It put its chin on the stick. It looked up at me, at the flower-covered omega sprawled in the dropped kindling, and its tail moved, once, against the stone. You could have heard a pin drop if anyone had dared to drop one. Lady Hesper's face went the colour of the silk she sold, and the Alpha King looked down at his own wolf, lying blissful at the feet of a scullery girl over a stick worth precisely nothing, and I watched the most controlled man in the territory lose, in front of his entire court, the one argument he had never expected to have, the argument with himself. He was furious. I could see it building like weather. "Whose is this?" he said, not loudly. The hall heard it anyway. I considered, briefly, denying all knowledge of the stick, but it had quite obviously come from the kindling sack still hanging off my arm, and there is no lying your way out of a thing the whole court watched you skid across the floor. So I gathered what was left of my dignity, which was not much, and I said, "Mine, sire. The stick is mine. I dropped it. I'll take it back, only—" I looked at his wolf, blissfully chewing on the end of my kindling. "It appears to be occupied." Somebody in the court laughed. They strangled it instantly. But it had been heard, and the king had heard it, and his jaw did the thing. That is how it started. I would love to tell you I understood, even then, what the wolf was telling the whole room. I did not. I thought what everyone thought, that the great beast had simply lost its heart to the wrong woman over a piece of firewood. The truth was stranger, and a good deal more dangerous, and I did not learn it for another 2 weeks, by which point I had been thrown out of the only home I had. But first, the king sent for me. It was that same evening, after the hall had emptied and the court had spent the whole afternoon discussing nothing but the omega and the stick. A page came down to the kitchens, looking faintly ill at having to address me, and announced that the Alpha King required my presence, and the entire scullery stopped to watch me wipe my hands and follow him up. A scullery omega summoned to the king is a thing that happens in songs, usually just before the sad part. He received me in a small stone room off the hall, all maps and cold light, the wolf already there, sprawled across the hearth with, I noted, my birch stick still tucked between its paws. The king stood at the window with his back to me and his hands folded behind him, and he did not turn around, and he said, in the voice that had never lost an argument, "Explain to me what you did to my wolf." "I dropped some firewood, sire. I have a gift." He turned around then. I had never been near enough to see his face do anything but the jaw thing, and up close, it turned out to be a perfectly good face, which was somehow worse. "Do not be clever with me. For 6 weeks, that animal has shamed me in front of every house in the territory. It has destroyed 41 gifts of state, and tonight it walked past a marriage cup to lie down at the feet of a—" He stopped. "A scullery omega," I offered. "You can say it. I sweep up after the embarrassment, sire. I am not precious about the word." His jaw did the thing. The wolf, hearing my voice, thumped its tail against the hearthstones with the stick still in its mouth, looking from him to me with the bright, stupid joy of an animal that has solved a problem the man has not yet noticed exists. The king regarded it as though it had personally betrayed his bloodline. "It will not settle," he said. And something underneath the control cracked, just slightly, just enough for me to hear it. I cannot court a mate with a beast that destroys every offering I am given. The court believes I cannot govern my own nature, and the one night it goes quiet for— He gestured at me, flower and all, lost for the word. "For the one thing in the room nobody was using to get something from you," I said. It came out before I had decided to be wise instead of clever, and it landed differently than the rest of it had. He went still. For a moment, the controlled man and the watching wolf wore exactly the same expression, and it was not an expression I knew how to be looked at with, and I found I had taken a step back without meaning to, and he had taken a step forward. And then we both stopped, a careful arm's length apart, like two people who had each remembered at the same instant that one of us was a king and the other swept his floors. He did not close the distance, I will give him that. I noticed it the way I notice everything, the deliberate not reaching, a powerful man holding very still so as not to frighten something small. "You may go," he said quietly, and the wolf whined, and I went. And at the door I looked back, and the most controlled king in the territory was watching me leave with an expression of such complete confusion that I very nearly felt sorry for him. I did not feel sorry for him long, because by morning Lady Hesper had heard that the king had summoned the kitchen girl to a private room. And Lady Hesper did the arithmetic a good deal faster than I did. They did not let me keep my place after that. You cannot have a scullery omega whose dropped firewood outranks a noblewoman's silver. And you certainly cannot have one the king sends for in the evening. The next morning, Lady Hesper had me by the arm in the corridor, outside the hall, and her grip was a great deal stronger than her soft voice suggested. Lady Hesper was the mistress of the king's house, the woman who ran Holloway from the linens to the larders, and who had spent the autumn arranging every one of the 41 destroyed gifts, presenting candidate after candidate, managing the king's courtship the way a general manages a siege. The wolf's nonsense had been ruining her campaign for 6 weeks. And now a kitchen girl's stick had ruined the climax of it in front of the whole court. "You will pack your things," she said pleasantly. "You threw that wood deliberately. A little omega trick to catch a king's eye. I have seen it before, and I will not have it under my roof." Her smile did not move. "Be grateful I am only sending you to the outer kennels and not before a judge for bewitching your alpha. The kennels need a hand. You like animals so much." There was no point arguing. I knew how these things end for women at the bottom. I packed my things, there were not many, and I went down to the outer kennels in the cold. And I told myself I had not lost much, which was a lie, but a useful one. I want to stop here, in the cold by the kennels, before I tell you what I found out, because I would like to ask you something while it is quiet. Have you ever been the only person who saw a thing clearly, and been punished for being right, out loud? Tell me where you are listening from tonight. I read the comments in the early hours when the kitchens are quiet, and yours might be the one I read. And if you want to find out why a king's wolf would trade a silver cup for a stick, the real reason, not the one the whole court believed, then stay close and follow along. Because down at those kennels, with a broom and too much time, I finally worked it out. I worked it out because they sent the ruined gifts down to the kennels to be burned. That was the kennel hand's other job, you see, disposing of the wreckage the wolf made, hauled down in baskets to the burn pit at the edge of the wood. And I, being interested in things that are none of my business, did not burn them straight away. I sat in the cold with 41 destroyed treasures, and I did what no one in that fine hall had ever bothered to do. I looked closely. And in the torn heart of every single one, woven into the rose stems, knotted into the silk, threaded through the links of the gold chain, pressed flat inside the seam of the marriage cup's velvet lining, I found the same thing. A hair-fine thread, grey as cobweb, that did not burn when I held it to the lamp, but curled away from the flame like something alive. A binding thread, charm work, the kind of old, quiet magic that does not announce itself, that simply sits inside a gift and waits to close around the will of whoever accepts it. Every gift the wolf destroyed had carried one. 41 threads in 41 offerings, every one of them arranged and presented by the same soft-voiced hand. I sat back on my heels in the cold, and the whole thing turned over in front of me like a coin coming up the other side. The wolf was not a snob. The wolf had never been a snob. The wolf had been doing the one thing a creature of pure instinct can do when something is trying to put a leash on the man it loves. It had been tearing the leash apart, gift by gift, for 6 weeks, while the entire court laughed at it, and the king himself burned with shame at his own animal's good sense. They had all looked at the wolf and seen a beast that could not be governed. I looked at the wolf and saw the only thing in Holloway that had not been fooled. And the stick. My plain, accidental, charmless stick. The wolf had gone calm over it, because it was the first thing offered anywhere near that king in 6 weeks that had nothing woven through it. No thread, no spell, no agenda. Just a piece of honest birch, dropped by a girl who wanted nothing from him but to get her kindling back. The wolf had not lost its heart to the wrong woman. It had finally been handed something true, and it had lain down in relief. I knew who held the soft-voiced hand. The trouble was that I was an Omega at the kennels, recently disgraced for bewitchment, and the person I needed to accuse was the mistress of the king's house, and there is no version of that conversation that does not end with my head. The king solved it by coming to the kennels. He came alone at dusk, which kings do not do, and he found me at the burn pit with the evidence spread on a sack at my feet. And I think he had come meaning to ask me something about the wolf, and instead found a kitchen girl holding a grey thread up to the last light. He went very still. "I know what that is," he said. "Then we are two," I said, before I could stop my mouth, "which is two more than thought to look." His jaw did the thing. I decided I was already disgraced and exiled, and had nothing left to lose by being myself. "Your wolf has been protecting you, sire, for 6 weeks. Every gift carried one of these. It tore them apart because it could feel the binding in them when no one else could be bothered. You have been ashamed of the only creature in this castle that was on your side." He crouched across the sack from me, this enormous, controlled man folding down to my level in the mud. And he looked at the threads and not at me. And when he spoke, it cost him something. "I have spent my life learning not to listen to it," he said. "The wolf. My father taught me a king rules with his head, that instinct is the thing that gets alphas killed, that the beast is a liability to be mastered." A breath. "I have been mastering it so long, I stopped being able to hear it. And it has been screaming at me for 6 weeks. And I called it an embarrassment, and I nearly—" He stopped. He picked up the grey thread and watched it curl from the lamp. "I nearly accepted the cup." "You did not accept the cup," I said, more gently than I meant to. "A scullery girl tripped over her own feet, and your wolf had just enough room to win 1 argument. It is not much of a system, sire. You might consider listening to him yourself, and saving the next Omega the bruises." He looked at me then, properly. The way you look at someone you have just realised you have been getting wrong. And his wolf, I felt it more than saw it, a warmth coming off him in the cold, pushed up under his ribs toward me with such open, undignified longing that the king actually flinched. He had spent his whole life overriding that. He did not know what to do with it now that he had stopped. "Who?" he said. "Whose hand?" I told him. I watched him not want to believe it, and then believe it, because he was not a stupid man, only a man who had taught himself not to feel his way to the truth. Every gift through Hesper, every candidate hers, a mistress of the house who did not want a Luna so much as a leash, a controlled match, a charmed wife who would owe her everything, and through that wife, a hand on the most controlled king in the territory. The wolf had known from the first thread. The man was only catching up. "I cannot move against her on the word of a disgraced Omega and a pile of ash," he said, and I felt my stomach drop, until he went on. "So I will not use your word. I will use hers. She has 1 gift left to give." His eyes came up. "She will want to finish what the cup began. There is a formal betrothal set for the turning of the week. She means to have me bound before the full court to the candidate she has groomed. She will bring her strongest work to it, and I am going to let her. That is the worst plan I have ever heard, I said. You will be there, he said, ignoring this entirely, in the manner of kings. In the hall, because my wolf will not do this without you in the room, and I have decided— The words came hard, a man using a tool he had refused his whole life. I have decided to trust him. Will you come? I am asking, Tilda. I have no right to. You owe Holloway nothing but a swept floor, and we threw you in the kennels for telling the truth. But I am asking. Nobody had ever asked me for anything. They assigned me. I looked at a king, kneeling in the kennel mud, asking a scullery omega to help him save himself, and I found that I had already decided. I will come, I said. Somebody has to keep an eye on that wolf. He has terrible taste in gifts. The betrothal was held in the Great Hall 3 days later, and I will tell you how close it came, because it came very close. Lady Hesper had brought her finest work. Not a cup this time, a betrothal cloak, deep blue, heavy with silver thread, the kind of gift a king cannot refuse, without insult, before the whole court. The candidate stood ready, a pale, frightened girl, who I suspect understood her part no better than the cloak did. And the king, who had spent his life performing exactly this, the controlled acceptance, the head ruling the beast, let Hesper drape the cloak toward his shoulders, with every appearance of a man doing his duty, and I stood at the back among the servants, where I belonged, and watched the grey threads come alive in the weave. I felt the binding close before I saw it work. The air in the hall went thick and cold, the way the world goes wrong just before you faint. And the king's face, the controlled, easy, never lost an argument face, went slack. His wolf hammering at him, and his lifetime of overriding it, holding the door shut at exactly the wrong moment. The charm pouring into the gap. He had told his wolf he would trust it, but he had 30 years of not listening in his bones, and the binding knew it, and it was winning. His wolf could not break a charm woven into a cloak already on his shoulders. But I could take the cloak off him. So I did the thing the wolf had been doing for 6 weeks. I crossed the floor, an omega again, forgetting her place again. And I did not wait to be saved, and I did not wait for permission. I went up the dais nobody had invited me onto, and I took 2 fistfuls of that beautiful charmed cloak, and I dragged it off the king. The binding, denied the will it had been closing around, came for the nearest one instead. Mine. No one had warned me what that would cost, because no one had ever expected the scullery girl to be the one standing in the way. The cold went into me like river ice closing over my head. The weight of the whole woven thing crashed down until my knees buckled and the breath stopped in my throat. The grey threads bit into my hands as I held the cloak away from him, and I felt them try to find the seam of my own will and close it. I gripped the charmed wool until my palms split and went wet, and I did not let go. I held it the way I have held everything in my life, by being too stubborn to do the sensible thing. I felt the wolf throw itself toward me through the bond, frantic, and I felt the king's hands close over mine, trying to take the cost back onto himself, and I would not let him. Because I had decided, the way I decide things, that this one was mine to carry. And then it broke. The charm tore through with a sound like ice going off a roof, the cold breaking all at once into a warmth that had a second heartbeat folded inside it. And the cloak was just a cloak in my bleeding hands. Dead blue wool and dead grey thread. And I was on my knees on the dais of the great hall, with the most controlled king in the territory holding me up, and not one shred of control left in his face. The hall had seen all of it. Lady Hesper moved for the door. She did not reach it. The king's second, a broad, steady man named Edric, who had been waiting by the servants' entrance on quiet orders all along, closed it before she got there. And Roderick rose, with his arm around me, holding me upright, and his voice came out of him with nothing managed in it at all. 6 weeks, he said to the hall, my wolf tried to tell me, and I called him an embarrassment. Every gift this woman brought me carried a binding meant to take my will and hand it to her. My wolf destroyed each one, and I shamed him for it. And tonight, when I would have let her finish, it was not my counsel, and not my guards, and not my own great mind that stood between me and a leash. He looked down at me, bleeding and furious, and 22, and covered in flour even now. And his face did a thing I do not have a dry word for. It was the omega you threw in the kennels for telling the truth. It was I who gave Hesper the last of it, though, because I had earned it. She turned at the door with some soft-voiced poison ready, and I did not let her spend it. You wove a leash for a king, I told her, into the silence the whole room was holding. And you never once thought to ask why a wolf would rather have a stick. He knew what you were the day you walked in. The only fool in this hall was the one who stopped listening to him. And the room let out its breath in a single rush, and Edric took her out the doors, and that was the end of Lady Hesper. And then the Alpha King of Holloway, in front of the court that had thrown me to the kennels, did the one thing he had spent his whole life refusing to do. He stopped ruling, and he asked. He turned to me, still holding me upright, my hands ruined, and the dead cloak at our feet, and he did not lower his voice for any of it. My wolf chose you the night you dropped a stick at my feet, and I have spent every day since being too proud to choose the same thing. I am done being too proud. His thumb moved once over my split knuckles. I am not asking because the bond is asking. I am asking because I have finally caught up to the only honest creature in this hall, and he was right about everything. Be my Luna, Tilda. Freely, knowing I have nothing left to bind you with, I burned all of that. Nothing but the asking. I had spent my whole life being assigned, and never once asked. I looked at a king who had learned the word at last, and I spent the one thing I had never been permitted to spend, which was my own choosing. I will not describe the kiss, except to say that the most controlled man in the territory was for one moment controlling nothing at all. And that something I had kept swept down and tidy and out of everyone's way my whole life was finally, in front of the entire court, allowed to be a glorious mess. There was fallout. There always is. A king who lets a steward weave charms in his hall for 6 weeks has shown a crack, and rivals noted it. And there were lords who could not stomach the sight of an alpha raising a scullery omega over the noble daughters Hesper had paraded. Let them note it. The charmed gifts were burned for true this time. The candidates were sent home with apologies and dowries, and the pale, frightened girl wrote me a letter from her own village a month later, thanking me for tearing a cloak off a man she had never wanted, which I keep. Hesper was stripped of her keys, her name, and her place, and sent beyond the territory's edge with exactly what she had given me, nothing but the cold and her own company. I am told she did not take to it. I am told this without sympathy. It is a year later now, and I am the Luna of Holloway, which the old lord still cannot say without a small private death behind their eyes. And I find I have made my peace with their suffering. I run the king's house now, the linens and the larders and the gifts, all of which I inspect personally, with a lamp, holding everything up to the flame before it goes anywhere near my husband. Because once a woman has torn a binding off a king with her bare hands, she develops opinions about quality control. Roderick listens to his wolf now. It took him a while. 30 years of not listening does not undo itself in a night. But he tries every day, and when he gets it wrong, he does the thing he learned late and at great cost, which is to stop and ask instead of decide. Pass me the salt. Walk with me. Will you? A man who spent his life ruling with his head, learning to let the rest of him have a vote. I have learned to hear the weight he puts on the small askings, and I always answer freely, with my own mouth, because mine is the voice that once crossed a hall to tear the leash off him, and it has not stopped being heard since. As for the wolf, he is insufferable, and I love him. He has decided, having won me with a stick, that sticks are the highest form of devotion, and he brings me one nearly every day. A good fat branch laid proudly across the threshold of the Luna's chambers. A knotted length of oak dropped at my feet during council, to the absolute ruin of everyone's composure. A small green twig set on my pillow like a jewel. My chambers look like a beaver's ambition. Roderick has given up apologising for him. I have given up wanting him to. There is a birch stick on the mantel of the great hall now, plain and split, and worth precisely nothing, mounted where a kingdom can see it. The lords think it eccentric. Let them. It is the most honest thing anyone ever gave that man. And I should know. I am the one who dropped it. So tell me, did you catch it before he did? Did you see, the way the whole court could not, that the wolf was never the fool in the room? Tell me down in the comments where you are listening from tonight, and whether you have ever been the only one who saw a thing clearly and got the kennels for your trouble. If this one made you smile, stay close and follow along. There is another waiting, and I promise you the next woman trips over something too. Until then, when somebody you love keeps tearing the pretty things apart, ask yourself what they can feel that you have stopped listening for. And maybe, just maybe, hand them a stick.